June 15th already, I'm Jodi Huisentruit.
June 27, 1995, Jodi Huisentruit never showed up for her morning news shift. Outside her apartment, a bent key scattered items and signs of a struggle. Then she vanished. If you found this case interesting, like the video, subscribe for more true crime stories, and drop your theory in the comments. Jodi Sue Huisentruit was born on June 5, 1968, in Long Prairie, Minnesota. She was the youngest daughter of Maurice Nicholas Huisentruit and Imogene Huisentruit, and grew up alongside her older sisters, Jill and Joanne. Friends and family remembered Jodi as bright, energetic, and ambitious from an early age. She had a warm personality and a natural confidence that made her stand out. She was social, determined, and often focused on building a future larger than the small town where she was raised. Her childhood was shaped by both normal family life and early loss. Shortly after Jodi's 14th birthday in 1982, her father Maurice died. His death was a major turning point for the family and left a lasting emotional impact. Despite the hardship, Jodi remained focused on school and her goals. Those close to her described her as resilient, someone who pushed forward even during difficult times. In high school, Jodi became known for her athletic ability, especially in golf. She excelled as a player and helped her team win the state Class A golf tournament in both 1985 and 1986. Her competitive spirit and discipline became defining parts of her personality. She was driven not only in sports, but also in academics, balancing both with strong determination. After graduating from high school, Jodi attended St. Cloud State University. There, she studied mass communications and speech communication, working toward the career she truly wanted. In 1990, she graduated with a bachelor's degree, prepared to enter professional broadcasting. Her education gave her the skills and confidence needed for television journalism. Before fully entering news broadcasting, Jodi briefly worked as a flight attendant for Northwest Airlines. Although it offered travel and opportunity, it was never her final goal. She wanted to work in television. She began her broadcasting career at KGAN in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, serving as the Iowa City bureau chief. Later, she returned to Minnesota for a position at KSX in Alexandria, before eventually moving back to Iowa. Jodi accepted a role at KIMP TV in Mason City as the morning anchor for the station's Daybreak program. As the 6-time AM news anchor, she quickly became a familiar face in the community. Viewers recognized her smile, professionalism, and lively on-air presence. In Mason City, Jodi was more than a reporter. She was a local celebrity. At 27, she was building a successful career and planning for something bigger. She hoped to leave Mason City and move closer to her hometown by finding work at a Twin Cities television station. She appeared to be standing at the beginning of a major new chapter in her life. On June 26, 1995, Jodi Huisentruit spent what appeared to be a normal summer day in Mason City, Iowa. She participated in a local golf tournament, an activity that fit naturally with her love of the sport and her outgoing personality. People who saw her there later described her as upbeat, friendly, and in good spirits. She socialized easily, spoke with other attendees, and showed no obvious signs that anything was wrong. During the event, Jodi mentioned receiving troubling phone calls and said she was considering changing her phone number. Some people remembered her sounding more irritated than frightened, while others later believed these comments reflected deeper concern. She had spoken before about unwanted attention and strange calls, and this detail would become more significant after she disappeared. Still, on that day, her mood remained positive. She even accepted an invitation to have dinner with organizers later that week, suggesting she was making normal future plans. After leaving the golf tournament around 8:00 p.m., Jodi stopped at the home of her friend John Vansis. Earlier that month, he had organized a birthday celebration for her and recorded it on videotape. That evening, she visited him to watch the homemade video from the party. The visit was brief and appeared routine. Nothing about it seemed unusual at the time. It would later place Vansis among the last people confirmed to have seen her alive. After leaving his house, Jodi returned to her apartment. She was expected at KIMP TV early the next morning. As the anchor of the morning program Daybreak, she normally arrived around 4 a.m. to help prepare for the 6000-M broadcast. Her schedule required consistency, and coworkers said she took her job seriously. When Jodi failed to arrive on June 27th, producer Amy Kunz noticed quickly. Around 4:10 a.m., Amy called Jodi's apartment to wake her. Jodi answered the phone and sounded normal. She asked what time it was, then explained that she had overslept. She said she would get ready and come in right away. Her first concern was how much production time remained before the show began, showing that she was focused on work and expected to be there. Jodi lived only about 5 minutes from the station, so Amy expected her soon. But as the minutes passed, she never arrived. By 6 a.m., it became clear something was wrong, and Amy had to fill in for Jodi on air. This was highly unusual. Jodi was known for being dependable, and missing a broadcast without explanation did not fit her routine. Concern turned to alarm. At 7:13 a.m., staff at Kemptee contacted the Mason City Police Department and requested a welfare check at Jodi's apartment. What had begun as an ordinary evening and a simple oversleeping call had suddenly become the beginning of a disappearance that would remain unsolved for decades. When Mason City Police arrived at Jodi Huisentruit's apartment complex on the morning of June 27, 1995, the first thing they noticed was her red Mazda Miata still sitting in the parking lot. Jodi should have already been at Kempt TV preparing for the morning broadcast, but her car had never moved. Investigators later learned the vehicle was not officially hers. She had been test driving it and was planning to buy it. Still, its presence outside her apartment immediately suggested she had never made it to work. As officers looked closer, they found signs that something violent had happened. Around the Miata, several of Jodi's personal belongings were scattered across the ground. Her bent car key lay nearby, along with one of her red high heels. A hairdryer, hairspray, and other personal items were also found in the parking lot. The scene did not look like someone leaving in a hurry. It looked like an interrupted departure. Investigators also noticed drag marks near the vehicle. These marks strongly suggested Jodi had been attacked while leaving for work and had struggled against whoever confronted her. The bent key indicated force, and the scattered belongings showed the encounter had happened quickly and violently. A palm print was recovered from a nearby area, reported as being connected to a vehicle or a pole near the scene. However, the print was never conclusively matched to a suspect. Police entered Jodi's apartment expecting to find more answers, but inside, everything appeared mostly normal. There were no clear signs of forced entry or a struggle. Her home looked like she had simply gotten ready for work and planned to return later. This reinforced the belief that whatever happened to her took place outside, not inside the apartment. Some reports noted unusual bathroom details, including the toilet seat being left up, but investigators focused mainly on the parking lot evidence. Neighbors soon added important witness statements. Several residents reported hearing a scream around 4:30 a.m., close to the time Jodi would have been leaving for work. In the quiet early morning hours, the sound stood out. Others reported seeing a white or light gray mid-1980s Ford Econoline van in or near the parking lot around the same time. One witness, Randy Linderman, remembered seeing the van at approximately 3:50 a.m. because it looked unusual in that normally quiet area. He said the parking lights were on, but the headlights were off. Another neighbor later described hearing car doors opening and closing and seeing a similar van parked nearby from her window before it disappeared. Taken together, the evidence pointed to one conclusion. Jodi likely walked outside in the dark, carrying her belongings and heading for work. When someone was waiting for her, she was attacked near her car, struggled, screamed, and was forced into another vehicle before sunrise. Despite the clear signs of an abduction, no confirmed suspect was identified and Jodi's body was never found. The parking lot became the center of one of Iowa's most haunting unsolved disappearances. Months before Jodi Huisentruit disappeared, she told friends, family, and police that she believed someone was following her. She described a man driving a white or dark pickup truck who seemed to appear repeatedly while she was out jogging. At first, the encounters may have seemed unsettling but uncertain. Over time, Jodi became more concerned because she believed she was seeing the same truck more than once. She later told people that the same vehicle had followed her to work on multiple occasions. Because her job required her to leave home long before sunrise, the situation made her increasingly uncomfortable. Jodi shared her fears with those close to her and admitted that she did not feel safe walking alone in the dark early morning hours. Her mother later recalled emotional conversations about how uneasy these experiences made her feel. Police were informed, and reports indicate that officers gave Jodi escorts to work on some mornings. She also took a self-defense class, which she completed just a few months before she vanished. These actions suggested that her concerns were serious enough to affect her daily routine. In a letter mailed to a friend shortly before her disappearance, Jodi reportedly wrote that she believed she was being stalked. The letter arrived the same day she vanished. making it one of the most troubling details in the case. Another major focus of the investigation was Jodi's friend, John Bancease. He had organized her birthday party earlier that month and recorded it on videotape. On the night before she disappeared, Jodi visited his home to watch that video, making him one of the last confirmed people to see her alive. Because of that timing, investigators naturally paid close attention to him. Public speculation increased because Bancease was more than 20 years older than Jodi, and some people believed he may have had romantic feelings for her. He denied that completely, saying Jodi was like a daughter to him. He insisted their relationship was simply friendship. He cooperated with police, answered questions, submitted DNA samples, and took lie detector tests. He was never charged with any crime connected to her disappearance. Years later, investigators quietly pursued more information connected to him. Authorities obtained GPS-related search warrants involving 2 of his vehicles, and in 2017, he was subpoenaed before a grand jury. Despite the attention, no charges followed. Investigators later stated that the surveillance and legal steps produced nothing significant. Much of the suspicion surrounding Bancease came from timing, public perception, and his closeness to Jodi rather than direct evidence. Other names also surfaced over time. Tony Jackson was investigated because of stalking behavior, violent criminal history, and alleged statements he made while in prison about abducting a news anchor. Police later stated he was not considered a viable suspect. Some also compared Jodi's case to the murder of Michelle Martinko and wondered whether Jerry Lynn Burns could be connected, but no proof supported that theory. In the end, multiple theories grew from Jodi's own fears and the people around her final days. Yet none provided enough evidence to solve the case. Her stalking concerns remain especially unsettling because they suggest she may have sensed danger before she disappeared. In the years after Jodi Huisentruit disappeared, investigators continued searching for answers with no clear resolution. Police and private investigators conducted more than 1,000 interviews, following leads across Mason City and throughout Cerro Gordo County. Volunteers joined organized searches of rural land, fields, and remote areas where evidence might have been hidden. Despite years of effort, none of those searches produced conclusive proof of what happened to her or where she was taken. With no body recovered and no confirmed suspect charged, the case remained suspended between missing person investigation and presumed homicide. In May 2001, Jodi was legally declared dead. It was an official step, but it brought no emotional closure for her family. Her mother, Jodi Huisentruit, and her sisters continued living with unanswered questions that never disappeared. Jane remained deeply affected by the loss. Over time, she became convinced that Jodi's body was near a lake close to her home. It was a belief she carried for years while continuing to hope for answers. She died in 2014 without ever learning what happened to her youngest daughter. Jodi's sister, Joanne Nady, remained one of the strongest public voices in the case, continuing interviews and public appearances to keep attention on Jodi's disappearance. In 2003, television journalists Josh Benson and Gary Peterson created FindJodi.com, a platform designed to keep the case visible and encourage new tips. It later expanded into Find Jodi Inc., a nonprofit focused on public awareness and continued investigation. Billboards were placed in Mason City with Jodi's image and a direct message reminding the public that someone knows the truth. In 2020, one of those billboards was vandalized with the words "Frank Stern's Machine Shed" painted across it in yellow. The message referenced retired investigator Frank Stearns, one of the officers connected to the original case. Police stated they did not believe the graffiti represented a credible tip, and instead believed it reflected someone with a personal agenda. New developments continued decades later. In 2023 and 2024, private investigator Steve Ridge revealed that Jodi had been involved in a blossoming new relationship shortly before she vanished. A man described as a secret man reportedly spent time with her only 10 days before her disappearance. This information raised new questions about jealousy and private tensions in her final days. Ridge also increased the reward for information leading to Jodi's remains, eventually raising it to $100,000 by late 2025. Searches in Winstead, Minnesota during 2024 and 25 followed anonymous tips and areas of interest, but nothing significant was found. Hulu's 2025 documentary revisited several persons of interest while clarifying that none had ever been formally identified as suspects by police. Detectives continue to say that people still communicate anonymously, suggesting fear remains strong even after decades. Jodi's legacy remains tied to Mason City, a respected news anchor, a beloved daughter and sister, and an unsolved disappearance marked by a bent key, a scattered shoe, and a parking lot that never gave up its final answer. From the morning Jodi Huisentruit failed to arrive at work, her family was pulled into a reality filled with uncertainty, fear, and unanswered questions. When police discovered signs of a struggle outside her apartment and confirmed that she had vanished, there was no clear explanation and no body to bring home. Unlike cases where death is confirmed, Jodi's disappearance created a painful space between hope and grief, where her loved ones were forced to live without knowing whether to hold on or let go. Jodi had always been especially close to her mother, Jodi Huisentruit. Their bond remained strong even after Jodi moved away for work. They took trips together, shared personal conversations, and stayed closely connected despite the distance. Family members described Jodi as warm, trusting, and deeply devoted to the people she loved. Her sudden disappearance shattered that sense of normal life and left Jane carrying a grief that never fully settled. For years, Jane believed her daughter might still be found. As time passed and answers never came, that hope changed shape but never disappeared. She later became convinced that Jodi's body was at the bottom of a lake near her home. It was a belief she held on to for years, reflecting how unresolved grief can create its own painful certainty. Jane died in 2014 without ever learning what happened to her youngest daughter. She never received the closure she spent nearly 2 decades searching for. Jodi's sister, Joanne Nady, became one of the strongest and most visible voices in the effort to keep the case alive. She appeared in interviews, documentaries, and national television specials, determined to make sure Jodi was not forgotten. Joanne often described her sister as someone who was too trusting, a person who saw the good in others and did not always recognize danger when it was close. She also spoke openly about Jodi's fears before the disappearance, especially the feeling that someone had been following her. After Jodi vanished, those earlier concerns became far more disturbing. Joanne continued to revisit those memories publicly, hoping that keeping the details alive might lead someone to finally speak. The family also had to endure decades of rumors, theories, and speculation involving possible suspects and questions about the police investigation. Every new lead created hope, and every dead end brought fresh disappointment. Public attention kept the case visible, but it also meant reliving the trauma again and again. In 2001, Jodi was legally declared dead. It was a necessary legal step, but emotionally it solved nothing. There were still no remains, no confirmed suspect, and no final truth. For her family, the case was never simply an investigation. It became a lifelong burden carried through years of waiting, remembering, and refusing to stop searching for answers. When Mason City Police arrived at Jodi Huisentruit's apartment complex on June 27, 1995, they found a scene that immediately suggested violence. Near her red Mazda Miata, personal belongings were scattered across the parking lot. Her bent car key lay near the vehicle. One of her red high heels had been left behind, along with a hairdryer, hairspray, and other items that should have been inside her apartment or car. Nearby drag marks strongly indicated that she had struggled and been forcibly taken before sunrise. The physical evidence pointed clearly toward an abduction, yet criticism later centered on how that scene was handled in the earliest and most important hours. Many believed the parking lot should have been secured faster and more completely. Reports suggested that the area was not immediately sealed off with strict control, allowing neighbors, residents, and others to move through the space before every detail could be properly documented. For a case built almost entirely around that parking lot, even small mistakes may have carried lasting consequences. Investigators entered Jodi's apartment and found nothing obviously disturbed inside. This reinforced the belief that the attack had happened outside while she was leaving for work. Because the struggle appeared to have taken place beside her car, the condition of that exact area became critical. Critics later argued that stronger crime scene preservation could have produced better forensic evidence, including fingerprints, fibers, shoe impressions, or other trace materials that might have identified an attacker. Her vehicle also became part of the criticism. The Mazda Miata, which Jodi had been test driving and planned to purchase, was returned to the family relatively quickly instead of being held for a longer period as evidence. Some investigators and longtime followers of the case believed this decision may have limited future forensic opportunities. Since she likely reached the car just before the abduction, many believed it should have remained central to the investigation for much longer. One of the most discussed clues was a palm print recovered near the scene, reportedly found on a nearby vehicle or pole area. Despite years of attention, that print never led to a confirmed suspect. Witness accounts added important detail. Several neighbors reported hearing a scream around 4:30 a.m., and others described seeing a white Ford Econoline van nearby. These statements were significant, but without stronger preserved forensic evidence. The investigation relied heavily on interviews and suspicion rather than proof. Years later, more controversy followed. In 2008, copies of Jodi's private journal were anonymously mailed to a newspaper. It was later revealed that the wife of former police chief David Ellenson had sent them, raising concerns about evidence security and trust. Former State Representative John Coyker also publicly suggested the possibility of a cover-up involving local officials, though no conclusive proof supported that claim. For many people, the unanswered questions about Jodi's disappearance began with that first morning. The signs of abduction were visible almost immediately, but the belief remains that mistakes made in those first hours may have shaped the case forever and made justice far harder to reach. Jodi Huisentruit kept a personal journal during the years leading up to her disappearance, writing about her career, relationships, emotions, and the ordinary uncertainties of daily life. Like many people balancing professional ambition with private reflection, she used those pages to record thoughts that were often more personal than what she shared publicly. After she vanished on June 27, 1995, investigators collected the journal from her apartment and placed it into police custody as part of the growing case file. For years, the contents of that journal remained private. Family, friends, and members of the public wondered whether her writings contained details about someone in her life, hidden fears, or signs that she believed she was in danger. Because Jodi had reportedly told people she was receiving troubling phone calls and believed she was being followed, many assumed her private writing might reveal more specific concerns. The journal became one of the most discussed, unseen pieces of evidence in the investigation. In 2008, 13 years after Jodi disappeared, that private evidence suddenly became public controversy. Photocopies of 84 pages from her journal were anonymously mailed to the Mason City Globe-Gazette inside a large envelope with no return address. The event immediately raised serious questions because the original journal had been in police custody since 1995. Someone with access to protected evidence had copied it, kept those pages, and later sent them to a newspaper. Soon after, it was revealed that the sender was Cheryl Ellenson, the wife of former Mason City Police Chief David Ellenson. The discovery created anger and confusion. Authorities never provided a clear explanation for why copies of investigative evidence had been stored at home, or why they were later mailed to the press. For many people following the case, this became another example of concerns about evidence handling and trust within the investigation itself. When portions of the journal became public, many expected major revelations. Instead, the entries were mostly ordinary and personal. They reflected Jodi's professional goals, moments of loneliness, emotional reflection, and uncertainty about relationships. One earlier entry described meeting a man during a cruise she had taken with her mother in 1994 and wondering why she had become attached so quickly. The writing showed vulnerability and honesty, but it did not identify a clear suspect or direct threat. What drew the most attention was what the journal did not contain. Friends and family had spoken about Jodi's fears of stalking, repeated unwanted phone calls, and her desire to change her phone number. Yet those concerns were not strongly reflected in the pages that became public. The final 2 weeks of journal entries were also noticeably sparse, creating more questions than answers. Some wondered if pages were missing. Others believed Jodi may have chosen not to write about certain fears, keeping them separate from her private reflections. Because only law enforcement had full access to the original journal, complete certainty was impossible. Instead of providing closure, the journal became another symbol of uncertainty, something deeply personal that should have brought clarity, but instead left the mystery even more unresolved. Jodi Huisentruit was already a familiar public figure in Mason City, Iowa, serving as the morning news anchor for Kim T's Daybreak broadcast. Every weekday morning, viewers saw her on television delivering the news with a steady on-air presence. When she disappeared without explanation on June 27, 1995, the contrast between her public visibility and sudden absence immediately drew intense local attention. Within days, the case expanded beyond Iowa and began attracting national interest. In the months that followed, private investigators working with the Huisentruit family helped push the case into national media circulation. Jodi's disappearance was featured on major programs such as America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries. These broadcasts brought in tips from viewers across the country, each one carefully investigated by authorities, but none led to a confirmed suspect or definitive breakthrough. The national exposure ensured that Jodi's case would not fade from public awareness in its early stages. Over the years, the story continued to return to television and streaming platforms. It appeared on ABC's 20/20, CBS's 48 Hours, Oxygen's Up and Vanished, and other true crime programs that revisited the timeline, evidence, and key individuals connected to the case. Each new production reintroduced the disappearance to new audiences and reignited discussion about individuals such as John Vancis and Tony Jackson. Though no conclusive evidence ever linked them to the crime, more recent productions again placed the case in national focus. The 2018 48 Hours episode and the 2022 ABC special Gone at Dawn featured interviews with family members, investigators, and those close to Jodi. In 2025, Hulu released the three-part documentary Her Last Broadcast, The Abduction of Jodi Huisentruit. That series revisited long-standing theories while clarifying that several commonly discussed individuals had never been officially named as suspects by law enforcement. It also highlighted how public speculation often expanded far beyond verified facts. Alongside television coverage, independent journalism played a major role in keeping the case active. FindJodi.com, created by journalists Josh Benson and Gary Peterson, became a central hub for case updates, tips, and public engagement. The platform later expanded into the Find Jodi podcast, which continued to examine evidence and interview key figures. Billboards in Mason City carried messages encouraging new information, reinforcing the idea that the case was still open. Law enforcement officials, including Lieutenant Frank Stearns, repeatedly emphasized that both the community and the country had not forgotten Jodi. This sustained media attention kept the case alive for decades, ensuring it remained in public discussion. However, it also created challenges. Alongside legitimate leads, widespread speculation and rumor often complicated public understanding of the facts. Individuals connected to Jodi were frequently scrutinized, sometimes without supporting evidence. Over time, the case became both a focus of investigative reporting and a subject of ongoing debate. Even after many years, Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance continues to be revisited through documentaries, podcasts, and news features. The story remains widely known not only because of its unanswered questions, but because it never reached a conclusion that resolved the central mystery of what happened that morning. Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance remains one of the most heavily investigated unsolved cases in Minnesota and Iowa. Yet after decades of work, no one has ever been charged. Police have pursued a wide range of theories over the years, including potential stalkers, acquaintances from her personal life, violent offenders, and even speculative suggestions of possible law enforcement involvement. Despite thousands of investigative hours, none of these theories have produced evidence strong enough to result in an arrest or prosecution. A central theory focuses on the possibility that Jodi was targeted by someone who had been watching her for an extended period. Her earlier reports of a pickup truck following her, unsettling phone calls, and discomfort about leaving for work before sunrise all contributed to concerns that she may have been stalked. Because she was a visible public figure on morning television, investigators considered whether her routine made her predictable and vulnerable during early morning hours. Another line of investigation explored individuals within her personal and social circle. Attention centered on men who knew her routines, friendships, or emotional life. Years later, information about a secret man she had reportedly been seeing shortly before her disappearance renewed discussion about possible personal tension or jealousy. However, no verified evidence ever established that this relationship directly contributed to what happened. Over time, other names surfaced in connection with broader discussions of similar violent crimes, including Tony Jackson, and comparisons involving Jerry Lynn Burns. These theories were examined, but investigators found no direct link between those individuals and Jodi Huisentruit. One of the most publicly discussed figures, John Vancis, remained a focus due to his friendship with Jodi and his presence during her final known hours. Despite extensive scrutiny, cooperation with investigators, and later surveillance efforts, authorities ultimately stated that no conclusive evidence tied him to the disappearance. Search efforts have continued for decades, including renewed investigations in Minnesota locations such as Winstead during 2024 and 2025. These searches were based on tips and reported areas of interest, but none resulted in the recovery of remains or new definitive evidence. At the same time, reward funds for information steadily increased, reaching $100,000 by late 2025, reflecting the continued urgency of finding answers. Despite all investigative activity, the core mystery remains unchanged. Evidence strongly supports the conclusion that Jodi was abducted outside her apartment during the early morning hours of June 27, 1995, yet what happened immediately after that moment is still unknown. The case remains open because no physical evidence, no confirmed suspect, and no recovered remains have ever provided closure. This unresolved gap is what continues to define the investigation. Every theory ultimately returns to the same unanswered question: who was responsible, and where did Jodi Huisentruit go after leaving her apartment that morning? Until that question is answered, the case remains active, and the search for truth continues.